There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch, Michael Ryder.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. Folks, it's been 27 years since the shooting of Tupac Shakur in Las Vegas, Nevada, after he attended a Mike Tyson fight. And there was a lot of conjecture that this case would never, ever be solved. And they just made an arrest in it. They're quite proud of this. The man on the left there is Duane Keefe Davis. The man he's a former gang leader. And he said publicly, or to an author, that the 4 shots that killed the rapper Tupac Shakur came from the vehicle that he was riding in. So that admission potentially is what put him in the hot water. For more than 25 years after the killing of Tupac Shakur, it became a defining tragedy in hip-hop. A self-described gang member who has repeatedly proclaimed that he participated in a drive-by shooting was indicted on a murder charge. This was according to Las Vegas prosecutors. Reviving a blockbuster investigation that had long stalled. The man, Duane Keefe Davis, has said in interviews and a memoir that he was in the front passenger seat of the white Cadillac that pulled up near the vehicle holding Mr. Shakur after a 1996 prize fight between Mike Tyson and Bruce Seldon in Las Vegas. The 25-year-old rapper was shot 4 times and died in a hospital less than a week later. A grand jury in Clark County indicted Mr. Davis on 1 count of murder with use of a deadly weapon, plus a gang enhancement, a prosecutor said in court this Friday. Mr. Davis, whose arrest was earlier reported by the Associated Press, is in custody without bail. Despite plenty of speculations, evidence, and reporting across nearly 3 decades, no charges have ever been filed in the shooting of Mr. Shakur, who was one of the most popular artists of the 1990s with tracks that brought poetic gravitas to confrontational gangster rap. But talk of the case was revived in July when the Las Vegas police executed a search warrant at a home in Henderson, Nevada, connected to Mr. Davis. We'll get more into this, but apparently the Mr. Davis, Mr. Keefe Davis, the whole gist of this shooting was that his cousin, Orlando Anderson, was beaten up by Suge Knight and Tupac Shakur in the lobby of the Las Vegas hotel where the Mike Tyson fight was they had just watched it. And this was all caught on video. So this was more or less a retaliation shooting for beating up Duane Keefe Davis's cousin. This was the era, really, of the rap wars. Tupac Shakur, and I'll get into it a little bit more later, but in 1994, he was shot 5 times in New York City outside a recording studio. He was almost killed during that shooting. So this was all between the East Coast and the West Coast beefs. And of course, it was Biggie Smalls and the Bad Boy Records was on the East Coast, and Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight, Death Row Records on the West Coast. So there was bad blood between these factions, and throw in the Bloods and the Crips, and this is an extremely violent situation where shootings and retaliation shootings and murders occurred all over just silly words between artists that were making millions of dollars. It really made no sense. With me tonight, and I'm happy to have him here because he's been MIA for a little bit, is Professor, retired NYPD Sergeant Mike Geary. Mike, welcome to the show.
Billy, thank you for having me on. Good evening, everybody. Thank you.
You know, Mike, I've been working doubly hard because you haven't been available and Phil hasn't been available. So I've been going solo. And
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa, talk about it not being easy to go solo. That's, it hasn't been. Mike, now, I don't know if you were on the job still.
Oh, yeah.
In the middle 90s.
Oh, yeah.
Early 90s. I guess you were. But there were really rap wars. And this whole East Coast, West Coast thing was a real thing. And two of the best rappers in the industry, Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur, succumbed, were murdered over this nonsense. And, you know, it was almost like a street cred thing. You dissed somebody, you didn't fist fight, you shot them. And it was like a mentality that I surely don't understand. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Billy, I remember I was in the 4-6 at the time in the Bronx. And, you know, it was the height pretty much of the cocaine war in New York City. We were getting, 2,000 homicides a year. You remember those days. It was absolutely crazy. And added to that, you had hip hop actually going bonkers in terms of its popularity. It was started out as marginal type of music, really got mainstream. Everybody was buying it. They were playing the records all over the place. It became popular on MTV. It was all over TV. There was so much money to be made in the hip hop genre of music, producing, distributing, the artists, the musicians, the performers. There was so much money to be made. It was too lucrative. And so you started getting, a lot of jealousy between different record labels and who they're signing. There's a good picture of Tupac right there. And because there was so much money to be made or lost. And you see this in New York City with rappers, and they were really, at the time, there were a lot of them were heroes to these poor kids living in like East Harlem, the South Bronx, places in Brooklyn, because what they were rapping about was living in an inner city and all the inner city problems. This isn't mainstream like 1960s Motown or rock and roll. This was real cutting edge, gut feeling kind of music. And it was controlled by several labels, affiliated with people who were, Bloods or Crips. It was an amazing time. And there was a lot of jealousy, a lot of rivalry. In some ways, it would be similar to like mafiosa gangs going at it, or outlaw motorcycle gangs going at it. They were fierce, violent rivalries.
Mike, it was thought that because these were rappers and that, in the eyes of their fans, in the eyes of perhaps people that loved them, that the police wouldn't make the effort because they didn't care. And I'm sure the police were met with a lot of uncooperative witnesses, because let's face it, their associates were gangbangers. So you're not going to get a lot of cooperation out of gangbangers, and that old expression, snitches get stitches, was probably invented during this time. And that carried over not just to the rap industry, but to the streets in itself. When we would have a shooting or a homicide, and you'd see a guy crying over the body of his buddy whose brains were all over the street.
Yeah.
And you would say, dude, do you know who did this? And the guy would just look at you like, no. And he was an eyeball witness.
Right.
And it was that street mentality. I'll take care of this myself. I don't deal with the police. And snitches get stitches. We heard that throughout our career.
Mm-hmm.
And the big thing that the police department figured out, and it was part of the whole broken windows theory of policing in the Compton era, was when you had a shooting or a homicide, you had to find out quickly who did it because the people on the other side were going to retaliate. And they weren't going to retaliate by cooperating with the police. They were going to retaliate by getting their own guns and taking care of it themselves. Nothing was that mentality more so than the rap industry. And as I said, the rap wars, the East Coast, West Coast, we definitely felt it in New York City. There were shootings, people were getting whacked on the streets of Harlem. And it had to do with some of this street mentality, that someone dissed you, you had to take care of it.
Yeah, Billy, they did it all on their own. There was no way that you could maintain street credibility and hold your head up high and even live on the street if you were seen talking to the police after a shooting. No way in hell could you stay in that community and talk to your peers, because nobody would respect you. Everyone would suspect you of cooperating. You had to live the gangster lifestyle. It's kill or be killed. You do not talk to the police. We see this with, like I mentioned, outlaw motorcycle gangs. They may hate each other. They may go at it, kill each other. But once the police are involved, they shut up. They clam up. They'll take their medicine. They'll go to prison, whatever they got to do. They will not talk to the police. They will settle it themselves. And that's a code. That's a code they live by. And so many homicides we see, like in the 4-6, Tremont Avenue, Burnside Avenue, Andrews Avenue, Jerome Avenue, Creston Avenue, 183rd Street, 2 blocks from the precinct. There'd be these wild shootouts, and no one would talk to you. There'd be 100 witnesses. You drive up there, you could still smell the gunpowder in the air as you got out of the RMP, and suddenly people are looking at you like they're in shock. They won't talk to you. They won't talk to you at all. No one will even approach you. You approach them, they walk away. Everybody has an idea. If they actually don't know exactly who did it, they won't talk to you. There'll be no cooperation. Their friends will take care of it. And so many homicides would go unsolved because no one would speak to it. And that's something you just dealt with. You knew it going into it. You saw it, and you and Phil saw it 10 times as much as I did. And you had to live with it. And that's just the way it went. And these guys were all gang affiliated, and they needed the gangs for protection. They needed the gangs to promote their music in rap. They needed them to distribute it. They needed them for street credibility, because you would have much more credibility if people thought that you were actually part of a posse, part of a gang. If you're just a single, singer, like the old days of Motown or something like that, no, no, you don't have any credibility. This, you had to have street cred. You had to kind of really live the life of a gangster, because that's what the public thought gave you street credibility, made your music, made your lyrics meaningful, heartfelt, accurate. And when they thought that you were real and not faking it, you would sell more records. And that was the way it went. That no one would talk to you. No one would talk to you at all.
Absolutely. Mike, I'm going to play. This is the Las Vegas police announcing the arrest. They're quite excited about it. They're quite happy about it, because they were accused for years of not working hard on this case. And people don't know how difficult it is to work a homicide when witnesses do not cooperate. And here's the ranking officer of the Las Vegas Metro Police.
Of 60-year-old Duane Keefe Davis, a.k.a. Keefe D, for the murder of Tupac Shakur. Davis was arrested this morning by my LVMPD criminal apprehension team, and this investigation started on the night of September 7th, 1996. It is far from over. It has taken countless hours, really decades, of work by the men and women of our homicide section to get to where we are today. Several of those detectives that are standing here with us include Detective Cliff Mogg, the lead detective on this case. He is now retired. While I know there's been many people who did not believe that the murder of Tupac Shakur was important to this police department, I'm here to tell you that was simply not the case. It was not the case back then, and it is not the case today. Our goal at LVMPD has always been to hold those accountable and responsible for Tupac's violent murder accountable. Just like we do for every homicide victim in our city. Every single victim, every life that is lost is important and remains a priority to this police department. As we methodically built this case to move forward with an arrest, it was also important that at the same time, we're building towards a successful prosecution. We work closely with our esteemed district attorney, Steve Wolfson, in his office to ensure that is going to happen. Mr. Davis's own words reinvigorated our case in 2018. I'm going to give you some of those details, and I'm going to introduce to you our homicide lieutenant, Jason Johansson, and he will provide you many of the details on how we got here today.
You know, Mike, I just want to let our audience know something. There were 4 people in the car with Duane Keefe D. Davis, and their names were Orlando Anderson, who was his cousin, Terrence Brown, and DeAndre Smith. They were all gangbangers. All 3 of them, besides Keefe, they're all dead. They were all the subjects of violence themselves. So that old expression in the Bible, you know, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. There's a lot of truth to that, you know?
That's right.
So all 3 of them suffered violent deaths. And here's Keefe D. Davis, whose cousin, this whole thing was based on the fact that Suge Knight and Tupac Shakur jumped him in the hallway of the Las Vegas hotel and gave him a beating. That's actually caught on video.
Yeah.
So gangbangers, of course, if that happens, they must retaliate. That's the rule of the street. They have to retaliate. And that's what this whole situation here, not the entire East Coast, West Coast thing was about, but this situation, that's what this was about.
Yeah, it's like
Thank you,
motto
Sheriff,
on motto.
and thank you, everybody, for being here today. My name is Jason Johansson, and I'm the homicide lieutenant with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And my goal here today is to walk you through our investigation and what led us to the indictment of Duane Davis, also known as Keefe D, for the murder of Tupac Shakur. This case has been reviewed by our homicide team and homicide detectives for over 2.5 decades. And ultimately, our persistence in this investigation has paid off. Let me walk you through a timeline of events that as we know them right now. Prior to September 7th of 1996, as we all know, Tupac Shakur was an artist who was signed with Death Row Records. And that Death Row Records and its CEO, Marion Suge Knight, were close.
But by the way, folks, the guy standing to Tupac's to our right, the right side of the screen, that's Suge Knight. He's doing life in prison. So this is one hell of a life to have. You know, Tupac's dead, and Suge Knight is basically doing life in prison. And the 4 occupants of the car that shot at Tupac that night, 3 out of the 4 are dead. So what does this tell you about this life?
Closely affiliated with the Mob Piru criminal street gangs, and that they had an ongoing feud with the Southside Compton Crips. Duane Davis was the leader and shot caller of the Southside Compton Crips. And both of these gangs operated out of the Southern California area of Compton. On the night of September 7th of 1996, Tupac Shakur, along with Suge Knight, and members of their entourage, which include members of Mob Piru, came to Vegas to attend the Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. Members of the Southside Compton Crips, which included Duane Davis, along with his nephew, Orlando Anderson, were also in attendance at the same event. As both were leaving the fight, members of Death Row Records spotted Orlando Anderson near an elevator bank inside the MGM. At that time, they began to kick and punch him near that elevator bank. I will now show you hotel security footage, as many of you have already seen, related to the incident. And on this incident, you will see Tupac Shakur, who's wearing a shiny satiny shirt, with Marion Suge Knight, who's a large man in a brown suit, punching and kicking Orlando Anderson. Following this incident, you'll see hotel security intervene, and then they will leave the area of the fight. Little did anyone know that it is this incident right here that would ultimately lead to the retaliatory shooting and death of Tupac Shakur. Following this incident, Tupac and Suge Knight both left the MGM to make their way to a post-fight party, which was to occur at a local nightclub. At the same time, word had spread amongst members of the Southside Compton Crips of what had occurred inside the MGM. And then that's when Duane Davis began to devise a plan to obtain a firearm and retaliate against Suge Knight and Mr. Shakur for what occurred inside the hotel against Mr. Anderson. After Davis obtained a gun, he entered into a white Cadillac along with Terrence Brown, DeAndre Smith, and Orlando Anderson. Based on our investigation, this is where we know they were seated. At some point in time, as they were in the white Cadillac, Mr. Davis took the gun that he had obtained and provided it to the passengers in the rear seat of the vehicle. As they were driving west on Flamingo Road near Koval, they had located the black BMW, which was driven by Suge Knight, and in the passenger seat was Tupac Shakur. And as they turned around, they pulled up near the passenger side of that vehicle and immediately began shooting at Mr. Knight and Mr. Shakur. Following that shooting, the white Cadillac fled the area southbound on Koval. And after our officers arrived on scene, Tupac was later transported to the University Medical Center, where he is treated medically and died approximately 6 days later on September 13th. My homicide section handled this investigation from its onset and for a short amount of time. And within a short amount of time, what we knew was that we were working a gang investigation where our victims, our witnesses, and our suspects were all from Southern California and not local to Las Vegas. Within the first few months of the investigation, our detectives knew most of the information I just briefed you on. However, we never had the necessary evidence to bring this case forward and present it for criminal charges.
You know, folks, I just want to, there's some people in the chat talking about how, 27 years, this is all they have. Well, you know something? There's uncooperative witnesses. You can't, they knew exactly what happened. They knew who pulled the trigger. They knew all the players. But if you do not have a witness, you cannot make an arrest. It's that simple. You know, you guys are, this is crap, 27. Yeah, because you're dealing with gangbangers. Everyone involved here is a criminal. You think they're going to cooperate? So you guys in the chat, you think that, the Las Vegas police shouldn't be happy about this? Look, the one idiot that opened his mouth, he's the guy that got the gun. He facilitated the murder. He facilitated the retaliation. The other three are dead. You want to charge them? They're dead. What are you going to do? Poetic justice. They're all three of them are dead, right? Now this guy who was the head of the gang, this Duane Keefe Davis, I don't even know if they can convict him. Basically, what they have is his words talking about how he was in the car and planned it. The idiot tells journalists and admits to it to them, and that's basically what they have. The strength of their case is his words. Your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, Billy, people would think that, I can't imagine that people would think that the police wouldn't want to make an arrest in a high-profile case like this. Of course you would. You're a homicide detective. This is what you do. They've committed a homicide in your city, and your city is a tourist attraction. You don't want your streets to be considered dangerous. You want to make that arrest. But remember, I think a lot of people don't really understand. You understand, I understand. to make an arrest, you need what they call probable cause. It's a low level of criminal suspicion. But to get a conviction, it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a much higher level. So therefore, there are many people who the police may have probable cause to believe committed a crime, yet the police know that, yeah, they could arrest them, but they won't be able to make a case in court. Remember, it's not what you know, it's what you could prove to a jury in court at a much higher level to get a conviction. And I saw that comment too, and I was surprised. But I think a lot of people don't really understand the difference between probable cause and proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The scene was chaotic, and I'm sure the city streets in Las Vegas aren't like they are now. This is 1996. There wasn't cameras all over at every single intersection. We live in a post 9/11, September 11th world. We live in a post Boston Marathon bombing world. We have a lot more cameras out there that could get a lot more information that we didn't have back in 1996. And the people involved, they knew who they were. They fled to a different state. They all lawyered up. They're not going to talk. They're going to live and die by the street code. That's the way it goes. And so, yeah, sometimes these things stall because you're missing a little bit of extra evidence. Now the prosecutor believes that they can probably make a halfway decent case in court. They got the indictment and they're ready to move forward. What I'm guessing, and you and I talked about this a little bit before we went on air tonight, is that probably when they did a search of Davis's house, there might have been some writing, there might have been some information that they gathered that not only did he himself place himself at the scene in the front seat of the car from which the bullets were fired, which in the very least makes you a material witness, or in the very least makes you a conspirator to murder, if not the actual gunman. They probably got a little bit more information that they thought they could really maybe get this guy behind bars. But for anybody to think that the police weren't actually trying to get arrest the killer of Tupac Shakur, that's crazy. This was a high profile case. Every detective worth the salt would want to be the one to put the handcuffs on that guy who shot and killed Tupac Shakur. This is their city, and they are homicide detectives, and this is what they do. And so I'm sorry that anybody actually would think that, but they don't really understand probable cause, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, what a homicide detective needs to arrest somebody, what a prosecutor needs to actually convict somebody.
Just to reiterate also, Tupac Shakur on November 30th, 1994, outside Quad Recording Studios in the vestibule, was shot and robbed in the lobby. And he was shot multiple times, like 5 times. It was surprising that he survived that. And that also had to do with this whole East Coast, West Coast, had to do with Biggie Smalls and a diss here and a diss there. Really like crazy, crazy stuff that you wouldn't think that people would lose their life over. But that's what was going on. And this was 1994. He was shot. Tupac Shakur was shot 5 times. That was in Midtown at a recording studio. And there's all kinds of stories behind all of this stuff. And but the bottom line, it culminated in this case,
right,
in the murder of Tupac Shakur. And now that they're making an arrest, nearly 27 years later, is it satisfying? Well, 3 out of the 4 people that were involved are dead, Right. And here's the 4th. This is the guy, probably the catalyst, who was involved, who was the one pushing for retaliation.
As time went on, this case had been reviewed multiple times by different investigators assigned to my section, but it wasn't until 2018 that this case was reinvigorated as additional information came to light related to this homicide. Specifically, Duane Davis's own admissions to his involvement in this homicide investigation that he provided to numerous different media outlets. In our section, we knew at this time that this was likely our last time to take a run at this case to successfully solve this case and bring forth a criminal charge. It was at that time that this case was assigned to Cliff Mogg, a detective within my homicide section. And over the last 5 years, my section worked closely hand in hand with the Clark County District Attorney's Office and followed a systematic investigative plan over the last 5 years. We've conducted countless interviews and corroborated numerous facts that were not only consistent with the crime scene on the night of the incident, but also corroborated and were consistent with the sequence of events that night. This ultimately led to us procuring a search warrant, which was executed at Mr. Davis's residence in Henderson, Nevada. And following the execution of that search warrant, in close coordination with the District Attorney's Office, this case was presented to the grand jury, which ultimately led to Davis being indicted on charges of murder. Before I get off to the District Attorney's Office, I would be remiss if I didn't thank Detective Mogg and all the other detectives that were not only assigned this case or this case, but all the other detectives from other agencies that assisted us in this investigation. They know who they are, and thank you very much for all this.
So 27 years go by, 27 years, and they make an arrest. And of course, they're extremely proud of their work. However, there's people that are going to say, oh, it took you 27 years. But in this case, we're dealing again with gangbangers here, and we're dealing with people that do not cooperate with investigators. I want to play a little bit of this because this is pretty interesting. It gives the inside story to this in regards to the investigation and some of the little tidbits from this case. There's little Tupac Shakur, of course.
27 years after rapper Tupac Shakur was shot to death in a car in Las Vegas, a man who confessed to his involvement in the crime is behind bars.
Who shot Tupac?
To keep it for the code of the streets. It just came from the backseat, bro.
Filmmaker Mike Dorsey predicted an arrest on Law and Crime nearly 2 months ago.
I think that they are going to close this case. I think that there is very likely going to be an indictment.
Thanks for joining us here on Law and Crime. I'm Anjanette Levy. Las Vegas Metro Police took Duane Keefe D. Davis into custody Friday. He's being held on charges related to the 1996 murder of rapper Tupac Shakur. Las Vegas Metro Police searched Davis's home in Henderson, Nevada in July.
The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. We have a search warrant for the resident. You need to come out with your hands up and your hands in.
At the same time, a grand jury was investigating Tupac's murder. Tupac Shakur was shot as he was riding in a car driven by Suge Knight one night in September 1996. Tupac had gotten into a fight with a man named Orlando Anderson at the MGM Grand during a Mike Tyson fight. The shooting of Shakur was believed to be retaliation for the fight. Keefe D later confessed that he gave Anderson, as his nephew, the gun to shoot Tupac Shakur. He made the statement in a proffer to police, but the statement could not be used against him in court. Years later, Keefe D admitted his involvement in Tupac's murder in his book, Compton Street Legend. Many view the book as a confession. Keefe D wrote about that night. I pulled out the Glock that Zip had given me and tossed it in the back seat. Bubble Up did the driving, Baby Lane and Freaky were riding in the back. Like two rams locking horns, Suge and I looked each other dead in the eye. The terrified expression on Suge's face read, "Damn them N-words." He goes on to write, one of my guys from the back seat grabbed the Glock and started busting back. Tupac Shakur died days later, and his murder would remain unsolved for years. Orlando Anderson was shot to death the next year. Filmmaker Mike Dorsey worked with retired LAPD detective Greg Kading on the documentary Murder Rap, which looked at Kading's investigation into the murders of Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur. I spoke with Dorsey about the news that Duane Keefe D. Davis had been taken into custody.
Well, this has been, for me, kind of a 10-year journey since we put out our doc, Murder Rap, which was the first documentary that put out his taped confession that his crew did this. And my reaction is that this has just been a very long time coming, and very, very, it's just an exciting day to finally have this. We didn't think this was going to happen at a certain point. It just seemed like so much time had gone by. You started to wonder, is it really going to happen or not? But the wheels of justice turn slowly sometimes, and that was the case here. But they got it done.
You said that you thought an indictment would be coming, but now you're saying you didn't think this would ever happen. So do you feel like it was taking too long? Because we had heard some rumblings that a grand jury was looking at this.
I'll just say
that guy Suge Knight is gigantic. He looks like he's about 350 pounds. The guy is huge. He looks like an offensive tackle.
He played pro football for part of one season with the LA Rams during the strike shortened season. It was like 86 or 87. He played football in college, like D1 football. He was a big dude.
Yeah, he's gigantic. And from what I understand, he was a bad guy, and now he's in the big house.
So initially, we had heard that it was going to happen very quickly. It seemed like an indictment was, 6 weeks ago, an indictment was like happening, and then nothing. And we heard the grand jury was convening, and it was very airtight. They're not telling us anything. They aren't telling the public anything. So you do start to wonder after weeks and weeks go by if they're really going to pull it off or not.
Mm-hmm. What do you think? What kind of witnesses do you think they have? Because everybody else.
Something, Mike, someone in the chat said, you mean Suge Knight doesn't know who shot Tupac? Of course he does. Of course he does. He looks into the eyes of Duane Keefe Davis.
He knew.
They both look into the. You think he ever told anyone that? Absolutely not.
No.
You think he didn't see the other three people in the car?
No.
He knew exactly who shot Tupac. That's what we're trying to tell you folks in the chat that refuse to believe that you can't force witnesses to cooperate. You can't make them say things. They have to say it of their own free will.
Yeah, that's part of the code of the street. Suge Knight, even if he got shot that night himself, also, he wasn't going to say a word. Nobody is going to talk to the police. Even when Tupac Shakur was shot in Quad City in the back, it was like in 1994, like a year and a half before his killing in Vegas, he didn't cooperate with the police. He wasn't going to cooperate with the police. He knew who shot him. He wasn't going to cooperate with them. The police? Are you kidding me? That would destroy his credibility. He was gang affiliated. There's no way he could talk. He could go to the police, talk to the police, and have the guys arrested, and for him to keep his credibility within his own gang and with his fans. No way. Not at all.
100%.
That was in that vehicle that night is dead.
Sure. I know some of the people that they've spoken to, but I can't disclose that. But correct. I mean, all three of the other people that were allegedly with Keefe in the shooter's vehicle, they've all died since this happened. Some of the key witnesses, like Tupac's bodyguard, is dead. Tupac himself, of course, being the closest witness, is dead. Suge Knight, being the next closest witness, will probably never talk about it. So I don't know exactly who they've spoken to that could help them build, a case around Keefe. But I do know that when Murder Rap came out, we heard from a lot of people that had information on this case that had never disclosed it before, who said that it basically filled in the gaps for them of what they already knew. So my guess is that that's who they've been talking to, is people like that who have pieces of the story. And when you put them all together, it's like this tapestry that comes together of a case.
In some of these interviews, Keefe D seemed very cognizant of the fact that he had to be careful about what he said. So he obviously knew that he still was at risk of possibly being prosecuted, but then he goes and writes this book.
Right. Yeah. When he did his interview with BET for Death Row Chronicles, which came out in 2018, he had an attorney with him present for that interview. And then after that, I don't know how much legal counsel he was getting. It's almost like when that came out and nothing happened to him, I wonder if maybe he got lulled into this sense of, I guess they're not going to do anything. I'll just keep doing interviews and I'll be careful on my own and do what I think, I can get away with saying without going too far. But yeah, it seems clear. I mean, the fact that you bring a lawyer with you to an interview to make sure you don't say too much does tell you that he must have, at least in the back of his mind, considered that he might still be able to be prosecuted for this.
Mike, what a What a stupid thing. Right? Here's a guy kept his mouth shut for 27 years, and then he's trying to make money off a book or whatever, and he tells the whole story. And a couple times he has an attorney with him. Who was it? Fired that attorney. I mean, what were you doing talking to telling the story? And I mean, you're an attorney. You would know they can use your words because you're voluntarily saying it. No one's
right.
Forcing you to say what you're saying. You're admitting to it, and I guess they can use that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember being in law school, and what they told us in criminal law class, they said, if you want to practice criminal law, you want to be a criminal defense attorney, the biggest thing you can do to help any client is to tell them to shut up. If you don't do anything more than that, you've done a good job. Now, if I'm his attorney, we're going into an interview, and we're going to be talking about the bad old days of Def Records and all this other stuff, and what was going on in hip hop in the 90s. And of course, they're going to be talking about the Tupac case. I want to see those questions beforehand as an attorney. I want to go to Davis and I want to talk to him and tell him what you think you're going to say. Let's edit it and fix it. And we're going to say this. We're not going to say this. You could say this. You can't say that. I would not ever allow him to answer a question that was just spontaneously asked and spontaneously answered. I'm sure off camera, if his attorney was there off camera, his attorney was probably going, oh my God, because that's like the worst thing he could sit there and say. Well, I have to maintain the code of the street, but the two killers were like 3 feet behind me in the back seat. Like you've now placed yourself as a conspirator in murder. Like what are you doing? But I think he needed to do it himself. Davis needed to do it himself to keep his name out there, to remind people that he was a tough guy, that he was a gangster through and through, and that he wasn't just some old irrelevant old man anymore. That he still had a lot of grit. He was still a shot caller. He was still a tough guy, and I think he just wanted to say it. He just wanted to say it, and he said it.
Yeah,
Sad.
I mean, I don't know why any attorney would allow a client to speak and not, educate them on the fact that, look, certain things you say can be used against you, even if you're saying them to someone that's not in the law business or the police business. And
it's spontaneous.
Yeah, it's a spontaneous utterance. In a smaller point of view, I remember one of the best pieces of advice I ever got on when I first went on the police department, and it was the old expression that everyone hears: "Loose lips sink ships," and it's so true. If you, the other side of that is you don't have something nice to say, don't say it at all. That was like ingrained by the nuns who used to say that, right? You don't have something nice to say, don't say it at all. But it's so true. Loose lips sink ships, and if maybe you should hold your tongue, and that could save you a lot of grief. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and ring that bell. And if you want to help us financially, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels. We also have a YouTube channel members with 5 different levels. And you see the folks in the chat with the green font. They're part of our YouTube channel members, and we really appreciate them. They help us get through the rough times. They help keep the lights on, as they say, right?
And the proffer deal, when he did his original, statement to the police about this, 15 years ago, that only covers what he says that day in that meeting. If he went on CNN that night and said the same story, they would be able to use that interview against him. So I think he knows full well he had to be careful what he said.
So what do you expect to come next? Obviously, Keefe D had to know something might be coming since a search warrant was executed on his home.
Sure. We don't know what the charges are yet. I'm hoping that if there's a press conference today, that they'll tell us what he's actually being charged with and confirm, of course, that it's for this case. And the next, I would think that he might want to do a deal, or that they might be interested in doing a deal. I don't know anybody wants this to go to trial and have that circus in Vegas. And so I would suspect that they would try to do a deal, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm. The Associated Press is reporting that a judge ordered Keefe D held without bail. The prosecutor on the case was quoted as saying during the hearing that Keefe D was the on-site commander who ordered the death of Tupac Shakur. For Law and Crime.
So, I mean, isn't that also, Mike, something called criminal facilitation? Facilitation and conspiracy, all of those things. I don't know if they would charge those things, but it's definitely, you're facilitating a crime when you supply the gun and give it to someone. Say you're the shooter. You shoot you. And someone in the chat before asked, was Suge Knight the target? I think they would have been happy with killing both of them. But I think that they were probably. I think the car was right next to the passenger side.
Yes.
So obviously, the person in most danger was Tupac, and he's the one that wound up getting. He took the brunt of it.
Yeah, there was always that theory that Suge Knight was also maybe the main target, and that maybe Tupac was shot. He was like, he just happened to be in the line of fire. But I think you're right, Billy. They as far as Davis and his nephew were concerned, you got to get one or both of them. And driving up on that side, on the passenger side, Tupac's the closest one. If you get Suge Knight, great. But they blasted that car probably a dozen times, a dozen rounds, and they got Tupac. They didn't get the other guy, but they both engaged in the beating of Davis's of his nephew. So
Orlando Anderson.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Orlando wanted either one or both of them dead. Absolutely. Somebody had to pay the price.
This is the district attorney from Nevada talking about the prosecution of this case.
Wolfson, it has often been said, justice delayed is justice denied. It's a quote we hear often and for many, many years when talking about our legal system, but not in this case. Today, justice will be served in the murder of Tupac Shakur. I'd like to acknowledge the relentless work of the many Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department homicide detectives. We've mentioned Detective Cliff Mogg many times, and we can't mention his name enough. He is the detective, along with his colleagues, that brought this case here today to you. A Clark County grand jury has indicted Duane Keefe Davis with one count of open murder with use of a deadly weapon with a gang enhancement. Davis will appear in court in the next few days or so for a hearing to determine his custody status and to set a jury trial date. This grand jury has been receiving evidence for months and has determined there is sufficient evidence to justify the filing of this criminal indictment. I've assigned two of my top prosecutors, Mark DiGiacomo and Banu Palal, to prosecute this case. I know a lot of people have been watching and waiting for this day. Tupac Shakur is a music legend, and for a long time, this community and worldwide have been wanting justice for Tupac. Today, we are taking that first step. Tupac was actually quoted as saying, "Death is not the greatest loss in life. The greatest loss is what dies inside while still alive. Never surrender." Well, we didn't surrender thanks to the great work of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department under the leadership of Sheriff Kevin McMahill, Lieutenant Johansson, retired Detective Cliff Mogg. I am proud to announce the return of this document. This is the indictment we've been waiting almost 3 decades for. It spells out the facts and circumstances and what justifies a Clark County grand jury in returning an indictment. Justice will be served. Thank you.
All right.
So that's obviously, no matter what anyone says, they're proud of this, even though it took 27 years. They didn't give up, and all the negative people out there that say, oh, it took 27 years, they didn't care, they didn't this, they didn't that. No, I think they did care, and one of the things I just wanted to, we talked about the whole, and here Mike and I, two old white guys, we're talking about the East Coast, West Coast thing, but
Hip hop. Yeah.
There's Biggie Smalls. The East Coast, West Coast hip hop rivalry was a dispute between artists and fans of the East Coast hip hop and West Coast hip hop scenes in the US, especially from the mid 1990s. Focal points of the feud were East Coast based rapper, the Notorious B.I.G. Wasn't his real name Kevin Wallace, I think?
Something like that.
And he was with Puff Daddy in their New York City based label Bad Boys Records, and West Coast based rapper Tupac Shakur with Suge Knight in their Los Angeles based label Death Row Records. The feud culminated in murders of both rappers in drive-by shootings, although several suspects have been identified up until today. Both of the murders were unsolved. Now, the murder of Tupac Shakur is solved. However, Duane Keefe Davis, he may not be the shooter. He probably is not the shooter. But yet, the concept, Mike, and you can explain it probably better than me, of acting in concert, with several jurisdictions now want to get rid of that, which I find ridiculous. I think California is one of them, that you can't be charged for acting in concert. Have you heard that, Mike?
I haven't heard. It doesn't surprise me given the state of affairs in California. But acting in concert with someone, facilitating their involvement in homicide, you are part of a criminal conspiracy. The moment you say you do one act, material act, to further a crime like a homicide, getting the gun, getting the ammunition, telling the driver where to go, that sort of thing, while the gunman is sitting in the back seat, you are as responsible as the person doing the actual pulling of the trigger. So that is all part of criminal conspiracy. It is a crime to conspire with at least one of the person and to materially facilitate the commission of the crime. And murder is the most serious crime we have. How any district attorney or any state legislature or any governor not want to prosecute these sorts of crimes is beyond me. That's scary, because it wasn't just one person pulling trigger. It was that one person being helped, aided, abetted, and helped organize and help getting away from the crime. There was a number of people. They are all equally responsible for that homicide.
100%. Some of the background of this was hip hop music and hip hop culture is widely considered to have originated on the East Coast of the United States in New York City. As a result, New York rappers were often perceived as feeling their hip hop scene was superior to other regional hip hop cultures, whereas those on the West Coast of the United States had developed an inferiority complex. By the late 1980s, however, West Coast hip hop was flourishing, led by acts such as Compton, California's NWA. And on November 12, 1991, Bronx rapper Tim Dog released the album Penicillin on Wax. It contained several skits which mocked West Coast artists and a diss track directed at the members of NWA, including Dr. Dre, entitled F. Compton. Dr. Dre would respond a year later on his debut album, The Chronic. Although Tim Dog would not figure into the late stages of the feud, his diss track presaged what was to come. This was also the same year that Uncle Luke came out with the album In the Nude, which was also dissed Dr. Dre. In 1991, Suge Knight co-founded Death Row Records in L.A. alongside Dr. Dre, Dick Griffey, and the DOC. Knight, a native of Compton, California, and a Blood, was among those in the West Coast hip-hop scene, irritated by the East Coast perceived condescension toward the West. In 1993, fledgling A&R executive and record producer Sean Puff Daddy Combs founded the New York-centered hip-hop label Bad Boy Records. The next year, the label's debut, released by Brooklyn-based rapper the Notorious B.I.G., also known as Biggie Smalls, and Long Island-based rapper Craig Mack became immediate critical and commercial successes. In 1994, New York-born, California-based rapper and actor Tupac Shakur had released 2 successful albums and starred in 3 movies. However, at the same time, his career was in jeopardy as he was low on money and standing trial in New York City on charges of sexual abuse, sodomy, and weapons possession. I hate when that happens, huh? It destroys your career.
Yep. And you're in deep for anybody that's going to help bail you out, loan you some money. And so we know that Suge Knight actually helped finance his coming back in his career. So he owed him a great deal. He owed a lot to that man at that time.
But, Mike, it seems for us who are reasonable people, and anyone who is a reasonable person, to, give up all these millions of dollars because of your street mentality and your street culture doesn't allow you to assimilate to a higher level. And, people could say, oh, you don't understand. Okay, I guess I don't, because, there was millions of dollars at stake here. Look, Puffy, P. Diddy, whatever he changed his name to now, he's a billionaire.
Right.
He's a billionaire largely from the rap industry. And he was smart enough to realize that the street cred and the street mentality wasn't where it's at.
Right. I mean, if I was looking up some information on Tupac, and at the time of his death, it was estimated that his estate was worth over $100 million, $110 million. For a 25-year-old man to have that much money and to blow it all and risk it all in beating up a member of another rival gang, it's going to be retaliation. It's not like nobody knows who you are. It's like everybody knows who you are. They know where you are. You're always going to be looking over your shoulder. You're always going to be in need of protection from your own people. That's one hell of a life to live when you've got that much money, and you could actually, if you had a good accountant, a good investor, you could take that 105 million and you can just live a life of some luxury and not have to worry about the gang banging mentality. He couldn't get out of it. He was part of it. He owed, people he had a record contract, and he owed Suge Knight. He owed him, I think, a couple of albums that was yet to be written and produced. So so long as his mentor, his boss, was in the gang, he was in too. Whether or not he was ever a Crip from blood from way back from when he was a kid, or he just got adopted into it. He took it. He ran with it. He lived the life of a gangster, and part of the living life of a gangster, it's fatalistic, it's nihilistic, it's get rich quick or die trying. It glorifies that sort of dangerous life experiences and life circumstances. And unfortunately, a lot of people, he got in, he couldn't get out. He couldn't get out. And as artistic as he was, Tupac was a great singer, great artist. I've listened to some of his music. It's got some really good stuff. The early stuff was excellent, and his life was wasted out of this sort of street thug mentality, and that's sad. What he could have done in the next 5 or 10 years of his life could have been amazing, but he helped cut his own life short by engaging in this violent street confrontation.
Mike, those 2 rappers to the left here, the one guy, is that Mikey Mike and Bombastic Bill?
I think so.
I think they do real thug rap. I don't know. They look a little thuggish.
Celtic rap.
Celtic rap. I don't know what their rap is. Anyway, let's play a little more of this here.
In connection with the Tupac Shakur murder. Las Vegas police have arrested a man on suspicion of murder in that 1996 drive-by shooting of the famous rapper. For more, let's get straight to our ABC's Tim Pulliam, also ABC News contributor Mike Muse, and ABC News legal contributor and trial attorney Brian Buckmeyer. Tim, let's just start with you. Tell us what we know at this time as we get this information.
So, Kira, this is very late-breaking information, but what we know right now from police sources is that Duane Davis has been arrested. He is being booked right now. We don't know what his charges are, but they are forthcoming. And this is someone that is known to investigators. You may recall that Duane Davis put in a 2019 memoir that he was in the Cadillac, the white vehicle that pulled up beside Suge Knight and Tupac on that Las Vegas Strip. But it's not clear yet who is the actual shooter, but we know that he was in the car according to his own words. So again, he is being booked. He's going to be charged. We don't know those charges at the moment. Now, all of this began when back in July, police in Las Vegas went to a home right outside of the city to do a raid. They did a search. It's not clear what they were looking for, but we know that they were looking for items in connection to Tupac's murder. So that was back in July, and now here we are with an arrest. Kira.
So, Mike, let's talk about what this means in the grand scheme of things. And I know, Brian, you can weigh in on this as well. Have both of you weigh in on this, because the three of us have covered this story over a period of more than a decade. That this is very different from the man that's been talked about that is the alleged shooter. That person, and I won't name that person, clearly you guys can if you want, he's no longer alive. So now that this arrest has been made, what do we think that Davis knows about who actually killed Tupac Shakur and just the outcome that could happen here after such a long and complicated investigation? Brian, let's start with you, and then Mike, I'll take it to you.
We don't need to hear what they have to say, because we know, basically, we know the background of this, that, Duane Keefe Davis gave the gun to whoever the shooter is. So he knows exactly who the shooter is. He said the shooter was in the back seat. So the two guys in the back seat were Terrence Brown and DeAndre Smith. One of them, they're both dead now. Mm-hmm. One of them is the shooter. So it's I don't know why this reporter is trying to act like this is a big secret, but maybe she thinks she's going to get stitches because she should be a snitch, but she's a reporter, So one of them is the shooter. There's no doubt that Keefe D here knows who the shooter is. He gave the gun to him. So let's not be coy here, folks. If you're looking for a great defense attorney in New York City metropolitan area, then Joe Murray is your man. Joe's a retired member of the service, a retired NYPD police officer. And you can reach Joe on his cell at 718-514-3855, or email him at joe@jmurray-law.com, or go on his website, jmurray-law.com. Not only is Joe a fantastic attorney, but he's a huge supporter of the Police Off the Cuff podcast, and we appreciate all he has done for us. So, Mike, how has the whole rap industry changed over the years? We don't see the violence that we were seeing in the 90s. This was definitely, a rival East Coast, West Coast thing. Some bad actors got involved in this business, cost a lot of talented people their lives. It's still not solved, the murder of Biggie Smalls on the screen right there. I'm sure they know exactly who shot and killed him. Again, there's no witnesses. There's no one coming forward to say, "Oh, I saw this" or "I know this," because again, snitches get stitches. All other occupants of the car that Duane Keefe Davis is in, 3 out of the 4, he's the 4th, they're all dead. So again, this is not an industry, at least back then it wasn't, that you could have longevity in.
No. But, when rap started getting very, very popular in the 80s and the 90s, it was the Wild Wild West show. It was, a free-for-all. It's like gold was was found, and everybody's running out to as a San Francisco 49er running out there, setting up a boom town. It was lawlessness. People were trying to make it rich as fast as you possibly can. There were no rules. It was brand new, it was fresh, and it was exciting. And, you're going to get organized crime type people involved in it. And since it's a young urban thing, you're going to get some of the Bloods, the Crips involved in it, because they've got the money, they've got the connection. There's a ton of money to be made, and therefore everyone wants the biggest piece of the pie that they can get for themselves in terms of artists, distribution rights, playtime on radio stations. They want it all, and so there's this tremendous rivalry before the industry matures into some sort of coherent, cooperative, sort of record label thing where we're doing this and you're doing that, and this is our specialty and this is your specialty. It was a wild, wild west show. Anything went. There were no rules. There were no laws, and people were just out to get the biggest piece of the pie they could. Just think of the millions upon millions of dollars that were at stake, and you've got that organized gang mentality, and therefore, there's going to be some lawlessness. But once it matures, once it's been around for a while, rap is now mainstream, much more mainstream than it ever has been before. And the record labels that are putting it out there, the artists that are putting it out there, they don't necessarily have to come and be seen as coming from, an urban setting where gangs are involved. So therefore, you're getting a lot more. It's a much more stable, mature environment, well-established environment. And so, thankfully, and therefore, you're not getting these type of homicides anymore, and this type of gang activity, and that's a good thing for everybody.
Absolutely. Well, I guess that would be your final thoughts on this case. But I thought when we saw this breaking news, I thought it was a good story to cover. It's a little outside of our mainstream stories here, but I remember in the 90s that we used to call it like the rap wars, and there was a lot of violence connected to it.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is somewhat a culmination of it. Well, not totally, because of course you have the shooter of Biggie Smalls still at large. This case is still unsolved, but there is no statute of limitations for murder. So, one day that could be solved also. Folks, I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. This Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. Have a great night, and God bless everyone.
Good evening.
One episode just ain't enough.